Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says governments will need to spend $3 trillion every year for imaginary climate change. Bend over and open that wallet wide. Here it comes again. Meanwhile, a new peer-reviewed study finds that carbon dioxide emissions now have zero impact on global warming because new CO2 falls out into more plants because it's what plants crave. In other words, burning fossil fuels simply converts toxic sludge, petroleum, into beautiful forests, meaning we would be spending $3 trillion a year for fewer trees. Janet's $3 trillion hustle comes at the G20 finance leaders meeting in Brazil, where she's currently spending your tax dollars promoting a Soviet-style takeover of the global economy in the name of climate. Hilariously, she frames that $3 trillion tax as the, quote, biggest economic opportunity of the 21st century. For perspective, $3 trillion is roughly 30 times what's already being spent on crony handouts to green billionaires and activists, 40% of which comes from so-called multilateral development banks like the World Bank, which are funded by your tax dollars going through a Rube Goldberg machine so you can't see what they're doing. Alas, Mrs. Yellen is just a cog in a much bigger machine. The UN is demanding $150 trillion for the imaginary climate crisis, the most ambitious taxpayer fleecing since the Federal Reserve. $150 trillion, is worth noting, is roughly half the accumulated wealth of the human race going back to Babylonia, pissed away so we have fewer trees. So what's next? Brought to you by Unchained.com. Like most government programs, climate change has nothing to do with the alleged crisis. If it did, that CO2 study would be on every front page. After all, it means we're out of the woods. The planet is not doomed after all, worth a headline or two. Instead, of course, it's crickets, because climate is just the excuse. The actual goal is that $150 trillion Soviet takeover. They'll do it with climate, they'll do it with COVID, they'll do it with war if that's what it takes. Of course, this is nothing new. The granddaddy of fake crises was World War I, allegedly fought over Serbia, and even today painted as just one big misunderstanding. In fact, the deep state engineers of that war on both sides openly saw it as a way to install what they called wartime socialism. Murray Rothbard writes about this in World War I as fulfillment, free at Mises.org. Then, as now, the left-wing media was only too happy to play along, ginning up a crisis to scare the plebs into handing over their liberties, their life savings, and, of course, their lives measured in the millions. 100 years later, the excuses change, but the goal remains the same, the eternal battle between liberty and those monopolies of violence we call governments. Given Trump's skepticism towards global warming, this next election will be a stark choice on climate. But given the profits involved, half of humanity's wealth, the battle will, alas, be permanent. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.